Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 85. And this episode, we wanted to talk a bit about photography in games. Photography gaming, using camera as a controller, the screenshots we make, and just photography in general. So we brought on a friend, we brought on a guest. We brought on Rob.
Hi there.
Rob Starobin. Hello.
Welcome, Rob. I won't even attempt to say your last name on air because I got shade from you on a separate podcast about I never get it right.
I mess it up all the time. It's why I was very subtle about it. I'm sorry. Could you please, just for the record, how do you say your name?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Case also worked really hard with me, and I think the final take still didn't quite get it right, but it's Rob Starobin.
Starobin.
Yeah. I can get it right
I could
after
just
you
edit
say
this and
it.
go, we have Rob Starobin on the show, and I could completely get rid of this, but why?
Right. Why would we do that?
No, I think this is just a bit that I'm going to do now for every podcast going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you might as well, right? You could get mad or just make it a joke, you know?
Or both.
Or both.
As Geoff with a G, I empathize.
That's fair. So, Rob, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I know you've been listening for a little while, and you've been on other shows on the network. And it seemed to make perfect sense as of when we're recording, since a recent announcement was the new Pokemon Snap. 20 years later, we're getting a brand new Pokemon Snap to talk about photography in video games, but also more importantly, to bring on a photographer to maybe just talk about why they do or don't take a ton of pictures in games. I know you are more of a real life in the meat space photographer and not so much a gamer photographer. And I wonder, is that because you prefer to take pictures in real life, or is it just kind of how it worked out and you hadn't given it much thought?
It's a little bit of both. I will say I did go a little bit crazy with photo mode when they first started bringing it out in PS4 games. Mm-hmm. And, like some of the Uncharted games and some of the Assassin's Creeds, where you can just get these amazing vistas, and they put in all the, maybe like a good tenth of what you could do in Photoshop for manipulating the photos. But even then, I think the problem I have is that I'll get so focused in on like wanting to get the perfect shot in photo mode that I stop playing the game. So I end up just taking like 2 or 3 really nice photos and then being like, I'm going to put this aside because otherwise I will never know what happens to Nathan Drake.
One could argue that even by taking all those photos, you are still playing the game. You're in their environment, and they gave you those options.
They did, but
yeah, you're right.
But I don't get an achievement
unlocked.
What
happens to Nathan.
I mean, that's really what it
unlocked.
comes down to. If I don't have a little banner telling me that I have advanced the game, I feel sad.
That's fair.
That's fair.
That's legit. Yeah, I think that my idea from this episode obviously spawned out of the endless excitement that Geoff and I have for a new Pokemon Snap that we will probably have to do a whole episode on when it comes out, because we've talked about it probably more than a lot of other games on this podcast, actually.
It's the only N64 game I have complete in box, and I'm very happy about that. And I've been keeping my excitement very close to the chest. I'm vibrating.
But that said, I thought it made me think very interestingly that a lot of games have used cameras as a mechanic. Most recently, I experienced it with BioShock 2, which I was playing on my Twitch channel, because there's an option to choose the camera. You take a photo of the enemy and then immediately switch to a weapon, and you gain knowledge or weaknesses for that enemy. And it's a mechanic that's been used in a ton of other things. And I'm curious if you both think that that's a good thing or a bad thing, because it's taking some of the control of the combat away from you, right? If you're doing something other than the game loop, or it's a different gameplay loop. I wonder if that's a good thing or a bad thing, or both, I guess.
I mean, for me, I feel like that is separate from photography as an art. That's just using the camera as a special kind of gun that gives you a different result. It's still fun, and unfortunately, I switched back to weapons very slowly, so usually it was a shot of me about to die. In BioShocks, I think 1 and 2 both had that mechanic.
Yes. Yeah, 1 does as well. And you got to get more of them in the frame to get more bonuses. So yeah, right when they're about to strike is the optimal time in a vacuum.
But yeah, and you do get some interesting, horrifying shots out of that, but it's not something that you can really manipulate after the fact. If anything, I didn't really go into my background as a photographer, but it does kind of remind me a little bit of live event photography, where there's crazy shit happening in front of you. And every once in a while, something will happen where somebody just like charges right up in your face, and you try and get that shot, and you end up with this very, very useless dark blur of maybe a little bit of skin and whatever. And you always want to get those shots because, you know, if they were perfect and you knew they were coming, then you could do something with that, but you never do. So you end up with a C+ or a D photo that barely moves your knowledge.
Fair enough. Well, and as you mentioned, we didn't ask you to share your background, your experiences as a photographer. Just for baseline, where do you take photos? What is your primary, still or action, live or studio? How did you come to be doing it? What is your background there?
So my current venue is usually my backyard, thanks to the quarantine. Right, I've been taking lots of macro photos of snails and spiders and ladybugs. But prior to quarantine, I had really two different paths for my photography. One is kind of nature photography in the wild, a lot of birds in flight and just wildlife, macro and long distance both, which I find very, very beautiful and soothing. And it's kind of how I find peace in the world, is to go out with a camera and some headphones and just, see what's out in nature. And the other, which is how I came to know both of y'all, was burlesque photography. I started about, it's 2020 now, 4 years and 30 days ago. I started going to D20 Burlesque. Actually, before that, I started going to D20 Burlesque. But about 4 years ago, I decided to borrow my wife's camera and just document the show. There were always a couple guys up front with cameras, and I was starting to see photos show up on Facebook and Instagram, and I thought, this might be fun. Let me give it a try. And I had barely used my wife's camera before that. It intimidated the crap out of me. I would use cell phone cameras before that just fine. I had a little, somewhat fancy point and click from Sony that I got out of a vending machine when I knew I was going to go whale watching once back about 8 years ago. But this was my first time using a kind of grown up real boy camera. And
DSLR and all that.
Yeah, and mind you, my first time shooting, I didn't know how to autofocus. I did not know how to white balance. Those photos were surprisingly usable despite all that, because the camera did a lot of heavy lifting for me.
Right.
But one of them actually, so that was D20 Burlesque's tribute to podcasts. And for a little while, Johnny Caligula and Mary Sin used one of those photos as their, I think Johnny used it as his avatar on Facebook, and one of the photos of Fancy Feast, and that ended up being used in a documentary on her.
That's awesome.
Like right off the bat, I was getting really positive feedback on really not that good photos. So I kept at it. And, by virtue of going to a show on at least a monthly basis, I was getting experience shooting thousands of photos on a pretty regular basis in pretty grim conditions. All the venues have their own nightmarish lighting conditions and
quirks.
And it's fine if it's just live action. All you have to do is adjust your eyeballs. But if you're trying to adjust a camera in real time from someone moving between 3 different spotlights, one of which is like a harsh green right on the side of their face. Matt, you know exactly what venue I'm talking about.
I do.
With someone, indiscriminately firing off a smoke machine with no warning.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. You kind of learn to adjust really quickly on the fly. And I got addicted to it. I ended up upgrading my gear quite a bit and became the official photographer of Magical Girl Burlesque. So that's the other side of what I do. The third side is also, to a much lesser extent, I also take composer and performer portraits for my day job, which is working for a classical record label. And I'm still very much in the getting the hang of that phase, but I've had work appear on CD covers and booklets and in multiple publications.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think one of my favorite composed shots you took back when my hair was red at I can't even remember the venue, but I used it for my Facebook page for a long time, of me just behind the DJ booth. And one of the reasons you became one of the regular photographers for MGB is because you always were good at turning around photos, and you, for as much of a lack of experience as you felt you had, it didn't show in your work, which I think is really telling about the kind of work you're doing. What's really interesting about you as a person is when I met you, I had no idea you were into video games. That conversation came up much later because we were meeting at nudie shows. So we mostly talked about music and, the goings on at those events.
Nerdy nudie shows, but still.
Well, nudie
yeah,
shows.
I mean,
I just wanted to say that.
at some point when a one-up sound hits after a tassel twirl, everybody's on the same page.
Pretty much, yes. But I'm curious. So you say that, like we said before, that you're more of a in-person photographer than a in-game photographer. Would you say that the Uncharted series is one of the more like beautiful cinematic games you've played that you enjoy taking photos in?
Oh yeah. I think I didn't do anything with 1 or 2. I don't know if those even had photo modes. Maybe they do in the remake, but
Right,
yeah, maybe.
4 was where I really kind of started exploring that, and I haven't played Dark Destiny, Lost Destiny,
Lost Legacy.
I haven't played that one yet, but I've heard it's really good, so I'm sure that's going to have beautiful vistas too. But there'll just be these moments, and I know a lot of these are designed for exactly this. You'll be coming out of a short cutscene, and Nathan Drake will be standing in like a cave mouth.
Yeah.
And you'll walk up to the cave mouth and the light will change, and all of a sudden there'll be this beautiful vista framed by a cave mouth. I'm really getting into this one because it's one of the photos that I specifically remember taking. And I played around with this. I did like 4 or 5 different versions of it. I'm pretty sure it's probably saved on my Sony account, but I don't know for sure. But yeah, it was just gorgeous, and I was playing around with all the different filter options, and it was solid. I mean, I could play with the exposure levels, what the pretty much everything I could do in camera, I could do on the screen there, with the addition of some Instagram style filters. I couldn't do any of the kind of crazy Photoshop manipulations that I'd be able to do at home if I had a Photoshop tutorial in front of me, but still, like 70% of what I would do out in nature, taking real photos, was right there, and it was surprisingly accessible and pretty. Like the results were just really pretty. I had a great time doing it because of that.
Yeah, what's really impressive about modern gaming with these modes is that I don't think, Geoff, that was the intent in the beginning. I feel like you talk about taking screenshots, and like we all played like PC games where we would hit the print screen button and paste it in Paint, and then we had a photo from a game. Like it was super simplistic, but I feel like gaming has leaned into this, like with social media, I would say is the biggest cause, like sharing this kind of stuff in a more accessible way.
I think so, yeah. Well, and also because now the technology has reached a point where, we talked about this in some previous episodes, the idea of the big graphical leap that has gone on from PS3 to PS4, Xbox 360 to Xbox One, and all of the PC increments along the way hasn't necessarily been more polygons, but yes. But the easily seen thing is the big vistas you can make, the draw distance that allows you to have a well-crafted environment go out as far as the eye can reasonably see. I definitely remember taking weird screenshots while playing EverQuest because the way the world would just work because of the Scotch tape and popsicle sticks nature of 3D gaming at the turn of the millennium. I would take screenshots when I would have first person view and go just below the water level enough so that the water disappeared and I could see the floor of the ocean and they hadn't put the filter on yet. And I imagine a lot of us did that too, where we would take photos because the game freaked out a little bit. Mm-hmm. You take a funny picture because your character's model butts up against another one and it's like, my head, where's my head? But yeah, nowadays it's more of a, holy shit, this is beautiful. And maybe they put in photo mode stuff because the countless people who put all of that effort in, it's like, stop and enjoy their work. Like, we've given you an excuse to stop and enjoy it and take a photo and save that and share that. But also, yeah, social media. Photography shows up a lot as a social media aspect in games nowadays. I mean, look at Kingdom Hearts 3.
Yep.
And the weird Instagram-ness of it. But that's also photography to find things, too.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it was an excuse to find the hidden Mickeys in the game, which is a game that's been played in Disney parks for ages. But, like, you can do any game that gives you a photo mode where you can also do selfies. I feel like the art slips out a little bit and the comedy slips in a bit more because the goal then becomes taking bizarre or funny pictures less than pretty pictures, I feel like. But yeah, I think it's also because it's free publicity, right? Like if you, I think it's brilliant that the Nintendo Switch worked in a way to attach your Twitter account and easily share your screenshots on Twitter and Facebook. You could as well for a time. Like, I think that's brilliant for the marketing side because then you're just posting screenshots of the games. I mean, like I've just started playing as of when we're recording Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. And when you save a screenshot to share on Twitter, it automatically populates the hashtags for the game and for Nintendo Switch because they want it to show up. They want people to be able to search it and find it, which, is less about the art and more about the, hey, look at me, check out this thing, which is part of modern photography, I feel like, anyway, in a selfie generation.
I mean, that's just always been art. Why are there, portraits painted of noblemen and fancy people? It was just more expensive. Selfie culture just lowers the barrier to entry. I have no problem with it.
Me neither.
But just being clear on that, I guess. But Rob, given that you do photography more as a side thing, whether as a side hustle or more as a personal pursuit, without the, the commercial trappings we're talking about here with games being like, let's put it on social media and it's free advertising. And you started, as you said, more doing nature photography and then started doing more action-based, more anything like that. Did you feel the same sort of journey in finding photography in games? Like first because I guess I'm assuming a bit and being like you started taking nature photos because nature's beautiful.
Yeah, I think so I used to live on Roosevelt Island, which for listeners who don't know New York City is a small kind of oval shaped island that's between Manhattan and Queens. And pretty much everywhere on that island is an amazing vista. If you're looking at either 19th century ruins, the Manhattan skyline, cherry trees in blossom. Now there's a Cornell campus there, but there wasn't at the time. That was a 40 or 50-year-old hospital that's since been torn down. But it's just it was a stunning place. So this was around 2010, 2011. And that was right around when I got my first smartphone that had a camera in it. So that would have been, that would have been a very early Android or maybe an iPhone, original iPhone, one or the other. But in any case, it had enough of a camera that I was going out there and I was catching, shots of the skyline and seagulls and bits and pieces of whatever there was. And it was partially the beauty and partially just this sense of like, I'm catching a moment that can't be repeated, which I will say is the big drawback to video games photography. all of those vistas are repeated for literally everybody who plays that game. Everybody is going to see Nathan Drake walk out of that cave into a vista in the exact same way. What you do with it, that there's some art there, but the moment is not unique in the same way that, pretty much everything in the real world is. So that's, I think, the other side of why I tend to get really excited about doing in-game photo modes and then kind of fall out of excitement after a little while. I'm not sure if that answered your question, Geoff, or if that was...
It does. No, it does. It's, it was kind of an open question, and you more than answered it. Well, and then one has to wonder about photography in multiplayer games or in online environments where in a single player experience, the views can be far more curated. Anybody who's played Zelda Breath of the Wild has had that moment, the title screen moment.
Yeah.
When you run out of the cave and you get to the cliffside and everything pans back and you just get a sense of the scope of the world and holy shit, it's Zelda. We all get that because it's just a single player, single controller. But when you bring in a multiplayer environment, you bring in the infinite monkeys and infinite typewriters. And even if we're all playing in the same environment, you see some truly spectacularly strange things. And even in terms of in one-on-one kinds of things, I definitely, I'm not a huge fighting game player, but I love seeing the strange moments, and whether photography or video or anything of that, of moments of two independent minds going at something insane in a known digital environment. Both of you guys, how do you feel about like that sort of shift, that sort of change, capturing those sort of digital human moments?
I feel like with a game like Smash Brothers, for example, which I think starting in the GameCube, you were able to take stills of the battle. Like if you pause the game, besides exiting the game, you could also take photos, and you could like shift the perspective around certain characters. Like I think Smash Brothers particularly provides a certain level of chaos that not a lot of other video games do. And so adding a photo mode to that was really interesting and really fun. I was recently rewatching Xavier Woods' Up, Down, Down YouTube channel, and he had done a Smash Brothers game in the new game with the folks from Super Beard Bros. And like watching that video and watching the hilarity that ensued as like they did crazy things with the characters, or like certain characters got spiked, or like, Kirby's infinite changing into different solid objects to crush people. I think that adds a versatility to taking photos that in other games doesn't exist. I think you're also right about the single player experience kind of defining repeatable moments that doesn't really happen in other games. And what's curious to me is I wonder, because we started the conversation talking about games like BioShock or Fatal Frame or even Pokemon Snap, where the focus is taking pictures to some degree. Like BioShock, you got something out of it. But even in a game like Fatal Frame or a Pokemon Snap, I have to assume those are going to be closer to an actual photography experience. Because even though certain characters or creatures will repeat actions based on their programming, you can't take photos of everything at once because it's closer and more akin to actual photography, where you can try and set up a shot, but like at least in Pokemon Snap, you're looking on two sides of your weird 3-wheeled car, so you can't catch everything the first time through. I think it will eventually come back to Rob's complaint, because if you play Pokemon Snap 18 times, eventually you'll get every angle because everything is pre-programmed.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that was just touched on really briefly is MMOs. And not so much, partially the chaos of what happens with 400 players running around in Stormwind doing whatever they're doing.
Yeah,
but
whatever.
Those moments where you've finally done some big achievement and everybody gathers for a cast photo, or people decide organically or not to do a kind of flash mob style thing where they all lie down and form a word that someone can photograph from orbit, from flying above them. Those moments are incredible, and I'm kind of sad that I haven't participated in any of them, but the photos I've seen of those are stunning, and those are actual genuine human achievements that people have documented with photography. And I think that's kind of getting closer to what I see as the real joy of photos, is being able to catch something special as it happens. That's not going to just happen again for the next guy who hits start.
Yeah, it makes sense. On a sillier side of things, because most of my MMO experience is EverQuest, remember a time when there was it was sort of a flash mob. The idea of everyone makes level 1 gnomes of whatever class you want, and we're all going to raid this orc stronghold and try to take down this one really difficult character. And when you're level 1, everything in that area is aggressive to you and is trying to kill you. And if you went into Clan Crushbone's area, you just saw a river of gnome corpses. And at level 1, they would disappear within half an hour. But there was if you died, you just and I think everyone tried to get their respawn point set to just outside the zone line. So just you died, you go again, you died, you go again. And so the same character might have dozens of iterations of them just prone on the ground. And what a weird, wonderful, human moment to capture. And it's those moments of strange ingenuity where we push the boundaries of what the developers meant for the environment.
For sure.
That's the real joy of it, I find.
Yeah, I think what's interesting with cameras in games, as we're trying to talk about it, is again, inspired by a conversation inspired by a game that's all about taking photos. But I wonder why we don't see more of those games, right? As I bring it up, I'm citing 2 games, a horror game that focuses on cameras, and then one game that until 20 years later didn't have a sequel. You would think that photography as a game mechanic would come up more. But I'm at a lot, and I'm sure there are probably indie games that use it as well that I'm forgetting.
There are more than a few, yeah.
But you would think it was just a more common mechanic that I don't think is used as much as maybe it could be. And I wonder why that is. Maybe is it because for an actual photographer, it won't fulfill the same joy that actual photography does? Or is it just not a popular mechanic to use?
I'm not sure. I can think of at least 2 more offhand. There was Beyond Good and Evil, which was an adventure game from about, the mid-90s?
No, it was early 2000s. It was
2000s?
GameCube, PS2, Xbox, that era.
Yeah, but I know the whole idea of that one was you're playing a photojournalist in this weird science fiction future. So that one kind of is very photocentric. And then I feel like there was a game in the early PC CD-ROM era where you were kind of in the Serengeti doing this is me being super vague because I didn't do any research on this and I'm just going off of faded 20-plus-year-old memories, but I feel like there was a game where you were in the Serengeti doing a safari and the whole idea was just to photograph animals. And it was, I think, the sort of game where you would get an animal insight in the game and then it would give you a little QuickTime video clip once you actually captured them.
Oh, cool.
But I don't think I ever actually played this game. I just remember seeing reviews of it in PC Gamer and whatnot back in the day.
I'm trying to look it up, and all I can find is Wild Earth, which is a National Geographic game from 2006.
Which I don't think that's what I'm thinking of, but this also might just be a fever dream. So
I mean, it could.
Distinctly possible. So many games are. Well, one theory that I have about that is actually that, okay, in Pokemon Snap, you capture whatever action shot, whatever weird moment you do, and at the end of the level, it gets assessed by Professor Oak, and a point value is attached to it. And I don't know about you, but I've definitely had a couple of photographs that I've taken where I was like, oh, that's great. Either the framing is good, or I caught a good bit of action, or I got this, and it didn't get a ton of points. Or one where it's like, that is a Pidgeotto's butt. I got the butt end of it flying away, but because it's large in the frame, you gave me a bunch of points, and that's enough? This seems arbitrary.
Not necessarily. I mean, you might just have found out that Professor Oak is a butt guy.
That's true.
into the cloaca of the common Pidgey.
I'm sure there's a fic of it already.
Probably.
Wonderful. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I know it runs deep. I don't need to go there to know that.
It's a bird hole, not a rabbit hole.
It starts as one, but then it evolves. But what I'm getting at is the idea of any time when you have artistic assessment within a digital landscape, no matter how sophisticated we get, and we've gotten pretty sophisticated, we run into weird moments. I mean, how many of us have sung along to stuff in Rock Band and you find out that it's like whatever aspect of, oh, you don't care about pitch or you don't care about this. It's just, am I making noise at the correct time or whatever else? It's like getting scored at the end of your song when you do karaoke at like a karaoke place.
Yeah.
And this is just that taken to another extreme with photography. That's one of my theories on it.
For sure.
Well, I will say in real life, people are also wrong.
This is true.
I've had Instagram.
It's artistic expression.
I've had Instagram posts that are absolutely gorgeous, get no response whatsoever, and mediocre ones suddenly explode. And people can be just as wrong as logarithms.
That's a fair point.
We are, if nothing else, overly complicated organic logarithms.
That's wow. That was deep, Geoff.
That's so. No, it wasn't. That was Reddit deep. That wasn't real deep.
I am curious though. Now that we are getting like the original Pokemon Snap came out in a generation where not everything was digital, and like in order to get your photos, you had to go to a Blockbuster because it was always a Blockbuster to print. Like bring your memory card and plug it in and then print your photos. Now everything's digital. So I assume with the Switch's integration to social media, like you'll just be able to post stuff directly from Pokemon Snap to the internet one way or another. I wonder how that might change the nature of the gameplay. If they'll incorporate that, if you'll get bonus points for uploading stuff, like they could easily gamify the social side of it. To another degree, like I feel like other photo modes are underutilized in games. Like I could have accessed a photo mode, I believe, in The Witcher 3 while I was playing it most recently, although it makes little sense because I don't think there were cameras during the time of The Witcher. But it feels kind of out of place for a game like that, so I'm less inclined to do it. Like there's a photo mode in the most recent God of War, but there were definitely no cameras during that time. So how is Kratos taking a selfie at that moment when there are no existing cameras in that world? Or does the narrative of having cameras not actually matter at all, and who cares?
Power of Zeus.
That doesn't matter at all to me. It's all just pixels.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's fair. Many, many pixels.
Although I wonder, this is completely unfounded and not tied to anything in reality necessarily. But
Excellent.
I wonder if it'll be possible to take photos in Pokemon Snap and export them to things like Instax printers and actually have little real life memorabilia of your photos in the future. Because I think that would just be like a little neat, memento.
And I think that's a great idea because that would also link it to the original Pokemon Snap, which when you had to get it printed out at a Blockbuster at one of those kiosks. And this was the age of the Game Boy camera, the Game Boy printer. And it was the idea of taking these photos was still tied to you get your film developed, but it's digital film, but it also made stickers. And we never outgrow stickers. No. Not really. No. So I think, I'm not saying they'd be leaving money on the table to not do that, but I think it's within the realm of possibility that, like export to an Instax or export to something that lets you print out your physical Pokemon photos.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
I think that it would be nice if there were a more streamlined way to get high quality versions of those photos. I mean, the problem with exporting to Twitter or Facebook is that those programs automatically de-res a ton of photos. So like everything can be even across the platform. And Like,
Yeah, that's just for sanity.
right. But it's a bummer because then if you then take the photo from Facebook and download it to your hard drive to then manipulate in Photoshop per se or something else, it's already a lower resolution version than what was actually probably on the hard drive in the game. And that's a bit of a bummer. But I think that said, I think allowing photo modes to export to a camera printer or to a more high quality program, like it just seems to me a little strange that no game console has incorporated Photoshop or something like it to allow you to manipulate photos above what you can do within the game. I think it's just kind of is common sense at this point, considering everyone's a photographer now, right? With smartphones and stuff.
Well, everyone takes pictures now.
Yes, that's true. It doesn't make everybody a photographer.
We're all content creators after a fashion.
Yeah, that's true.
To get back to photography and single player experiences for a moment, one of the other things that I have noticed in when photography comes up as whether a primary or tertiary mechanic in a game experience, it encourages you to explore the environment a little more. One of my favorite things about games and gaming narrative is the fact that while, yes, there are those moments that we have spoken of already that are everybody gets this same tracking camera shot, everybody gets this beautiful view. There's also the environments of, well, what happens if I manage to get behind this door? Or if I turn around right now from this beautiful shot, what will I see? What happens if I look to the side here? What metaphorical or literal skeletons will I find? What strange pieces of the narrative will I find? It's easy to forget that, and this was, I was reminded of this on social media a few days ago, which is why it's fresh on my mind. In Portal, the cake is a lie meme, the whole experience of that is not a necessary part of the gameplay. If you just play through all of the tests and you go through everything once GLaDOS turns on you and you do everything, you never see that. If you fully explore the test chambers and kind of find a weird off the beaten path, you then find the Ratman's lair, and you then find, before cake is ever mentioned, the cake is a lie. So that you, in your explorations, are given that extra layer, no pun intended, that when the cake is mentioned, you're tuned into that. So I do feel that, yes, it still has a little bit of a... It will grow stagnant quickly, but it reminds me of, check off your bingo card, Metal Gear Solid. There is an unlockable digital camera in the original game, and this doesn't get talked about much these days. I don't talk about it much. You can find ghosts in the game. You take photos and you then go to the photo and edit the photo. You move the sliders around and ghostly images pop up, usually over dead bodies, sometimes in strange places. And I think there's eventually unlocks or something. I think they also do it in the second game because, in the first chapter, part of the game is you have to take photos. You have to take photos of the new Metal Gear, and they have to be good enough for the algorithm of the algorithm, literally the AI made by Otacon, to be like, yeah, this is good. And from there, you can also catch all kinds of strange things and strange photos. And I feel like and all this is to say, I think another underutilized aspect of photography mechanics in games is the way that it can encourage us to seek and search and uncover new aspects and layers of this limited but often deep world that is laid out in front of us.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that Animal Crossing this time around on the Switch resonated for me in a bigger way, partially because it came out during a pandemic and everyone needed a vacation from it, but also because you can not only take in-game camera shots, but you can just the Switch has a dedicated take a photo button. it made me want to be more aesthetically pleasing with how I design my house, with how I set up my front yard, and all of these things that in previous games there was a reason to do it also, but because I could share it with other people so easily, because I could just with a click of a button go, here's what I'm working on in Animal Crossing, it felt more important and more focused to do it. I don't know that was an intended effect of taking photos in the game, but it was definitely a result that I experienced that I had not experienced in previous Animal Crossing games. Like I couldn't tell you on New Leaf, the 3DS Animal Crossing, if I did any of that stuff. I mean, I liked the game and I remember enjoying it, but I can't remember anything about my layout of my town or where I put stuff. But I still, even though I haven't played it in weeks, very well remember my Animal Crossing New Horizons island because I purposely placed stuff. I took a lot of photos. I shared a lot of stuff. I hung out with folks on my island. I think it just adds a level of customization and forethought on designing that I might not have had if I couldn't take pictures of it.
Well, and yeah, it's interesting that through series, through console iterations, you run into either more freeform or not forms of photography like that. I mean, we've talked about Pokemon Snap several times already, but I mean, older Pokemon mainline titles have photography moments. There were points in X and Y where you could get your picture taken. There is, when they introduced the Rotom Pokedex, it has a camera function, and you can post your photos and they get comments. Some of them were more jokey comments than others, but it was still that idea, but not quite the same as being able to customize your environment and note it and notate it. And I think that's also a thing of storage space now. If you took a photo in Metal Gear Solid, it took up a slot on your 15 max slot memory card. So probably one of the reasons why it's not talked about a ton. But you do that in Uncharted 4. You do that in Red Dead Redemption 2. You do that in Animal Crossing. And we've got gigabytes and gigabytes of storage. That is closer to, I guess, the photographer experience.
Yeah.
You take a lot of photos, you get rid of a bunch of them, but...
Yeah, and specifically, that's very close to the burlesque experience where I'm taking, over the course of an hour-long show, 1,500 photos and knocking that down to about 200 good ones. So there's a lot going on there that couldn't be done back in the day with, say, a film camera, where I'd be boned because I do not have the skills to get 28 good shots out of one canister of film.
Oh, yeah. I remember the days of shooting with a disposable camera and getting that back and just going, well, I can use 3 of these.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, I got a few, okay. The rest are blurry or of my thumb, but, what can you do?
I mean, I still kept them.
Right, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
I just don't put them up.
Well, I think a lot of it, and I imagine you must find this even with real photography, Rob. Real photography, whatever the fuck that means. Not to sound too pretentious myself, but like with taking photos in real life, you must find that the shareability of it, the fact that you can share things with your friends so easily, that everything is so digital, must also be part of the experience. While I'm sure you're taking photos for you, just like artists write songs for themselves and create things for themselves, part of it is also being able to share a beautiful photo and folks comment on it and enjoy it also. I imagine that is if not the whole experience, at least part of wanting to share the work that you make.
Yes and no. I mean, there's a yin and yang to that. The good side is when there's positive feedback and when you get something out there and it feels great. The downside is there is a sense of kind of publish or perish where it turns into an obligation because it's, if you're not posting, Instagram is giving you kind of little guilt trip reminders. Hey, you haven't posted in a while. And you're not getting the little serotonin bursts. But the other side of that also is just that curation is really important. Like right now, for the last couple of weeks, it's felt really disrespectful to post kind of happy burlesque photos or wacky nature photos,
right,
during the Black Lives Matter protests. To bring things down a bit. But instead, I just posted up some images that the NAACP said were kind of goals for where to go with the protests. On the other hand, as things get back to, hopefully, I don't want to say normal, but as things resolve, it's going to be a bit weird going back to that, because it sometimes also feels really frivolous because it isn't my day job. It's like you said, Geoff, it's either a side hustle or just a hobby. So it's not something where I have that kind of driving obligation of, if I don't do this, I don't get a paycheck. So yeah, I think I kind of brought everything down a little bit there, but it just does feel a little bit tricky to balance out when it's a good time to share stuff and when it's inappropriate.
For sure, and I get that. I mean, we struggle with that with posting the podcasts and sharing podcasts, and I think for sure, for the last few weeks at least, I've been a little quieter about promoting stuff, but I think a healthy mix of sharing what needs to be shared and getting information out there, but also doing what you think will make you or others happy. I think there's a balance to it, but I don't know that there is a correct answer. I think you're right. I think at the end of the day, you have to do what feels good for you. And if that means not taking what you consider frivolous photos and just sharing information to support the Black Lives Matter movement, then that's the priority. That's what you've got to do. I think we're living in a time where there's no clear answer to that. And I think also something that's been painfully aware taking photos in games, to wrap it back around to the topic, is there are a lot of white male protagonists in games. And taking photos of them and seeing folks post photos of them, you realize that kind of a flaw that, like, oh, we could change up the diversity of games a bit. I love that that we're broaching those topics. And I think the shareability of games within a photo mode or anything else is allowing us to come to grips with a lot of that stuff that we might not have noticed before, not been less aware of before.
And what this is telling me is we need more pictures of Spider-Man.
Well, Miles Morales, yes.
Well, no, that's kind of the thing. I realized we hadn't even mentioned the photo mode of Spider-Man for the PS4, given that we are all New Yorkers, and there still is a sheer giddy joy in how they rendered New York City in that game. I know it's not the complete thing. I live in Manhattan, and my neighborhood isn't in there. That's fine.
No, yeah, the Bronx doesn't even exist.
Bronx doesn't exist. What's the Bronx? He's from Queens. He works in Manhattan. Everything else can just soak its head. But it still is, Peter is a scientist, but a photographer as well. And that's the way and we come around to, at last, everyone is sharing pictures of Spider-Man. And I just found this a very nice, with the next Spider-Man, hopefully they keep the photo mode for Miles.
Yeah.
And we'll get more. It will be removed from the, J. Jonah Jameson, Peter Parker paradigm, but we need more pictures of Spider-Man, Miles. We need, and however that falls out.
Yeah, for sure. I think that what's really interesting about talking about photography in the perspective of video games is that there's no right way to do it unless it's a game like Pokemon Snap or Fatal Frame where the mechanics are tied to it. But what's interesting to me is that as more games have photo modes, as more games allow us to take stock of everything that's going on in those games, it must also add to the work and weight of the developers, right? Like, Rob, you were talking about the vista you took in Uncharted 4, which I'm sure a lot of folks took that photo, but you also, as a meticulous nature photographer, could go find a relic somewhere within the grass in one of the sections off in a corner and want to take a photo of that. And then when you zoom in close, find that the rendering of maybe an ancient coin or something doesn't have all the polygons or is missing a pixel, whereas other folks might not look for that. And I think the attention to detail in gaming will only go up as they give us access to search and photograph and interact with all of it.
I'd disagree with that, just because I think that there's so much stuff out there in pretty much any AA or AAA game at this point that players never get to experience. I mean, we've all played BioWare games where you've spent 150 hours and seen maybe a tenth of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think anything that allows you to draw more attention to something that the creators have made, it makes them happy. Unless it's, a glaring bug.
For sure.
Or some sort of other mess up. But
Right.
But I think there's so much stuff that they create that just doesn't get the sheer amount of experience that they would like it to have. That I mean, yeah, you might catch an error or a missing pixel or something just not quite being up to snuff. And I think what they're talking about with Epic Engine and the PS5 is going to dramatically change that in terms of being able to just drag and drop assets in really, really easily. But I don't know. I think I'm speaking for a developer here, not for developers here, not being one. But I think that they want their work to be seen, and they want all the obscure bits and corners. The bits under the stairs with graffiti about cake. They all want that to be seen, and there's. I mean, how long ago was the original Easter egg in Adventure? That was what, 40 years ago now?
40 years, nearly. Was it 82? It's if it isn't 40 years, it's coming up on.
So I mean, there's always shit out there that people have been wanting people to see, the weird shit that they put into corners all that time, and having more tools to kind of go, look at what this weird ass developer made. I think makes the weird ass developers happy.
It's a fairly good point.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think photo mode these days is kind of another aspect of story difficulty, where it's sometimes people play the games to overcome great challenges. Sometimes people play the game to see the story. And sometimes people are playing the game and entering the environment to enjoy the environment. And yeah, a photo mode, if not necessarily just a photo mechanic within the game, is just another way of, exploring all of those nooks and crannies. And, story difficulty lets the narrative shine, and the people who put a lot of work into all of those dialogue trees, into all of those quest lines, just the same as photo mode showcases, all those wonderful details, all those strange and weird, wonderful corners of the game. And none of them are inherently correct or wrong. They're just ways we interact with the game and have fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Slarty Bartfast getting so excited about the fjords. And just, as a designer, he made that one little thing, and he was so hyped for it. And unfortunately, Arthur had never seen them, but still,
But what a beautiful... Yeah, you're right.
It's just this moment of this guy spent however many, there's no sense of time associated with it. It could have been weeks. It could have been millennia, creating this bit of natural beauty. And he just wanted to be acknowledged for it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I think there's no wrong or right way to interact with photography and gaming, or appreciation of those intimate things that you've made and that you're proud of. I think there will be games that will judge you anyway, a la Pokemon Snap we were talking about, where there will be an arbitrary point system. But I think at the end of the day, if you're enjoying the function, there's no kind of right way to enjoy it. And I do like that you can take absolutely bonkers photos in Kingdom Hearts 3 and then post them to that social media page that, like, I saw a photo the other day of someone fighting, I think it was Xemnas, and like Xemnas is clearly about to attack Sora, and Sora's just like doing the peace sign and taking the overshadow photo, and it's like, this was probably not the best time to pull out a camera, Sora, and yet...
But
was it?
I mean, in all honesty, no matter what, you're manipulating a camera when you play games, especially 3D games. I mean, isn't that what the problem was with the N64 era, like poor camera control? Now we control the camera better. And sometimes we're just a little more on the nose about it being a camera.
Yeah, that's for sure. Rob, I want to thank you for joining us to talk about photography and games. I always appreciate your expertise and your energy and your enjoyment. You've been featured on quite a number of other shows on the network, including one of my other podcasts and Case's shows as well. But I would love to give you an opportunity to promote the stuff that you do and make and share, and where folks can find you on the internet.
Yeah, I have photos you can see for sale at robstarobin.com, robstarobin.com. And you can see my 2 Instagrams. I've got a Safe for Work Instagram at Rob Starobin and a burlesque and less safe for work Instagram at robstarobin.nsfw.
Awesome.
Very cool.
And then, of course, besides thanking Rob, I also want to thank our listeners. I want to thank the Certain POV podcast network, which we are a part of. As I mentioned earlier, there are a ton of great shows, including Another Pass. Case did an episode about Buckaroo Banzai with Rob Starobin, and it was a phenomenal episode in absurdity. A movie I've still never seen, and now I definitely have to watch.
Fix that.
Yeah, because I didn't know that RoboCop made other movies. I didn't know that actor had been in other stuff because he's so well known, Peter Weller, for RoboCop, and so the fact that he's the lead in that, it definitely piqued my interest. So hopefully there's somewhere I can easily access it in the world of streaming. But that said, we have a ton of other shows on the podcast network. You can go to certainpov.com to see all of those shows, as well as a permanent link to our Discord server, where Rob is a very active participant in pretty much every channel we have on the network. And we're super thankful for that. And also tell us about your favorite moments in gaming that require photography or not even require it. Or do you have favorite screenshots? We have a screenshot channel within the fun and games section of the Discord. Share some of your favorite shots. I'm always curious how folks interact with these kind of mechanics, or do you just completely ignore them? Are you more like Rob and you're more about playing the game than actually stopping to take photos? Or do you feel it doesn't fulfill what you want from a photo mode? Any of these things are correct.
Or are you like me and you still use your Game Boy camera as the best camera you have?
Oh, and totally unrelated to that, but if you Google, there is somebody who's taken a Game Boy camera, made an adapter, tied it to a really long lens, and taken amazing photos using the Game Boy camera of nature from the distance. I'll see if I can find that link and post it in the thread when this goes live.
Yeah, no, there's some incredible stuff people are doing with Game Boy cameras. There is an SD card reader for it now. There's somebody who turned it into a streaming camera. They stream using the Game Boy camera in a Super Game Boy.
Amazing.
The world is amazing. And listeners, you don't have to be that strange or esoteric to share something wonderful. We just want to know how you interact with all of this, because this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Did you know Rob Thomas has been writing since the mid-90s?
The Matchbox 20 guy?
No, the guy behind Veronica Mars.
Oh, and iZombie.
And Cupid, Party Down, the Cupid reboot.
I haven't seen those.
Me neither, but we should watch them and then talk about them on our podcast.
Yes. We could call it the Rob Thomas.
No, not that one.
Robcast.
Every other Tuesday with Alex and MJ.
Find us at notthatrobcast.libsyn.com or wherever you download podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.